Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the dark secrets behind shocking real-life stories. Today, we explore Betrayal in the Confessional, the priest who preyed on trust. Father Marcus Delaney stood as a symbol of unwavering faith in the tight-knit coastal town of West Haven. To the townspeople, he was more than a priest, he was a guiding light. His calming presence filled the air during Sunday sermons, where his words seemed to penetrate even the hardest of hearts. Parishioners trusted him implicitly, sharing their deepest fears and most painful regrets in the safety of the confessional booth. Father Marcus had cultivated an image of humility and devotion, always placing the needs of his congregation above his own, or so it seemed. From the outside, his life appeared as pure and pious as the white collar he wore. He would rise with the sun, spending hours in prayer before opening the church doors. He visited the sick and elderly, offering words of comfort and prayers for their healing. His acts of kindness were endless, organizing food drives, fundraising for community causes, and even personally helping repair the homes of struggling parishioners. To those who knew him, Marcus was a man who lived to serve others, but the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Beneath the polished exterior, Father Marcus harbored a chilling secret. He was a master manipulator, using the sacred trust placed in him to identify those most vulnerable. He preyed on the broken and desperate, those who saw no way out of their struggles. When someone entered the confessional booth and poured out their soul, Marcus wasn't just listening to absolve them of their sins. He was taking mental notes, cataloging their weaknesses and fears. This information became his weapon, a tool to exploit the very people who trusted him most. His methods were subtle and calculated. A widow grieving the loss of her husband might find herself confiding in Marcus about her worries over finances. He would assure her that God's plan included security and peace, offering to help manage her resources in the meantime. A struggling business owner might share his anxieties about mounting debts, and Marcus would suggest that the church could connect him with discreet solutions. The priest's tone was always one of concern, his advice tinged with authority and warmth. Over time, he managed to entangle himself in the lives of those he claimed to serve, gaining control over their decisions without ever raising suspicion. Father Marcus's manipulation didn't stop with money. He thrived on power, on the sense of control he had over those who revered him. Every donation, every whispered confession, every act of trust was another thread in the web he spun around his unsuspecting congregation. He chose his targets carefully, ensuring they would be too ashamed or afraid to ever speak out against him. After all, who would believe that their beloved priest could be capable of betrayal? For years, Marcus operated in plain sight, his sins hidden behind the veil of holiness. He gave fiery sermons about morality and selflessness while secretly profiting from the pain and vulnerability of his parishioners. His double life required constant vigilance, but Marcus thrived on the thrill of deception. Each new victim was a reminder of the power he wielded, a testament to his ability to manipulate even the most sacred of bonds. In West Haven, Marcus was untouchable, his reputation as unblemished as the church's gleaming white steeple. But as he knelt before the altar each morning, murmuring prayers of gratitude, there was no remorse in his heart. Instead, there was satisfaction that he had everyone fooled. Eleanor Wright was a fixture at St. Augustine's parish, her unwavering faith evident in her constant presence at church events. The widow, who had lost her husband 2 years earlier, found solace in the rituals of faith and the guidance of Father Marcus Delaney. Her devotion to the church and her trust in Marcus were absolute. To Eleanor, he wasn't just her priest, he was a confidant, someone who could provide clarity in her moments of doubt and despair. When she confessed her fears about her financial struggles after her husband's death, she believed she was placing her trust in the hands of someone who genuinely cared. Eleanor's concerns were significant. Left with an inheritance that seemed sizable at first glance, she had quickly realized that poor investments and rising expenses were draining her savings. She confided in Marcus during one of her confessions, explaining how overwhelmed she felt managing her late husband's estate. Marcus, ever the reassuring figure, promised her that God's guidance was at work and assured her that he would personally help her navigate her difficulties. His words were warm, his demeanor compassionate, and Eleanor left the church that day feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Days later, Marcus followed up with Eleanor, offering a solution. He suggested transferring her funds into a secure account, one he claimed would protect her assets from risky investments and ensure a steady income for years to come. His explanation was convincing, layered with financial jargon that made the offer seem professional and trustworthy. Eleanor, already vulnerable and desperate for support, agreed without hesitation. She trusted Marcus completely after all. He was a man of God. Not long after the transaction, Eleanor began to have doubts. The paperwork Marcus had provided seemed vague, and attempts to get clarification were met with evasive answers. Her initial relief gave way to unease, and she started to wonder if she had made a mistake. Determined to address her concerns, she requested a private meeting with Marcus. What transpired during that meeting remains a mystery, but Eleanor was last seen leaving the church that evening, her expression tense as she walked to her car. The next morning, Eleanor's neighbor reported her missing after noticing her house remained dark and empty. Police discovered her car abandoned near a desolate stretch of road on the outskirts of town. The vehicle was locked and there were no signs of a struggle, but Eleanor's purse and phone were missing. Despite extensive searches, there was no trace of her, and the case quickly grew cold. The community was shaken by her disappearance. Prayer vigils were held, led by none other than Father Marcus, who delivered impassioned speeches about faith in the face of uncertainty. He comforted Eleanor's friends and neighbors, urging them to trust that she would be found. His presence was a balm for the grieving community, further solidifying his image as a compassionate leader. Unbeknownst to anyone, Marcus had orchestrated the perfect crime. He had manipulated Eleanor's trust to gain access to her finances, transferring her wealth into accounts under his control. When she confronted him, threatening to expose the deceit, Marcus acted swiftly, ensuring her silence. What happened to Eleanor after that meeting was a secret he intended to take to his grave. As the weeks passed, her absence became another tragedy in the town's history, with Marcus standing at the center of it all, untouched and unsuspected. Lisa Harrington, a young and determined journalist, was drawn to Eleanor Wright's disappearance not just as another story, but as a puzzle that demanded solving. Unlike the locals who had accepted Eleanor's vanishing as an unfortunate mystery, Lisa was intrigued by the gaps in the narrative. Her instincts told her there was more to the case than met the eye, and she began to dig deeper into Eleanor's life, starting with her connections to St. Augustine's parish, and, more specifically, Father Marcus Delaney. Lisa's initial research was inconclusive. Eleanor was widely regarded as a kind, soft-spoken woman with no known enemies. Her finances, however, raised a red flag. Lisa discovered that Eleanor had been grappling with significant money issues before her disappearance. Through interviews with friends and acquaintances, she learned that Eleanor had turned to Marcus for help, confiding in him during one of their private meetings. While this wasn't unusual, Marcus was known for offering guidance to his parishioners. It planted a seed of suspicion in Lisa's mind. Determined to uncover the truth, Lisa began tracing a pattern. She found that Eleanor wasn't the only member of the congregation who had sought Marcus's advice about personal struggles. Several parishioners had approached him over the years for help with financial troubles, marital issues, or emotional crises. What stood out was the troubling consistency in the aftermath of these interactions. Many of these individuals either suffered significant financial setbacks or mysteriously distanced themselves from the church. In a few cases, like Eleanor's, they disappeared altogether. Lisa's breakthrough came when she managed to contact a retired private investigator who had been quietly hired by the family of another missing parishioner, Margaret Hensley. Margaret, a single mother, had vanished 3 years earlier under eerily similar circumstances to Eleanor's. She had also confided in Marcus before her disappearance, seeking guidance after falling into debt. The investigator had compiled a detailed report, but it had never been shared with authorities due to the family's fears of damaging their reputation. The report contained damning evidence. A trail of bank transactions linking Margaret's accounts to a shadowy offshore entity. Lisa compared this with Eleanor's financial records, which she had accessed through a source at a local credit union, and found a chilling match. Both women had transferred large sums of money to accounts tied to the same offshore fund. The name on the transactions was deliberately obscured, but further investigation revealed ties to shell companies Marcus had quietly established years earlier. Armed with this information, Lisa realized she was uncovering something much larger than a single case of fraud. She was peeling back the layers of a calculated scheme that had likely claimed multiple victims. Each discovery made Marcus's involvement seem more plausible, yet his spotless reputation acted as a shield, deflecting suspicion. As Lisa continued her investigation, Marcus became aware of her prying. Though he maintained his calm demeanor in public, he began taking steps to cover his tracks. He destroyed incriminating documents, transferred remaining funds to different accounts, and subtly warned those closest to him not to entertain Lisa's questions. His paranoia grew with each passing day, though he remained confident in his ability to outsmart her. Lisa, however, was undeterred. Her instincts told her she was on the brink of exposing the truth. With every connection she uncovered, the pieces of the puzzle began to form a clearer picture. She knew that Father Marcus Delaney was hiding something sinister, and she was determined to bring it to light. Lisa Harrington's persistence finally began to yield results as she unearthed more evidence tying Father Marcus Delaney to the financial exploitation of his parishioners. The handwritten ledger she discovered among Eleanor Wright's belongings was the key to unraveling his carefully constructed facade. The pages detailed multiple transfers made under Marcus's guidance, including amounts, dates, and vague justifications that sounded like legitimate church initiatives but pointed to personal gain. For Lisa, this was the breakthrough she needed to escalate her investigation and bring authorities on board. When she presented her findings to law enforcement, the initial response was cautious. Marcus's reputation as a beloved figure in the community made the allegations difficult to believe. However, as Lisa laid out her meticulously gathered evidence, bank transactions, testimonies from victims' families, and inconsistencies in Marcus's records, the police had no choice but to reopen Eleanor's case and investigate further. The deeper the investigation went, the more horrifying the revelations became. The ledger was just the beginning. Authorities uncovered a complex web of financial manipulation, with Marcus using the church as a front to funnel money into offshore accounts. His victims were often vulnerable individuals who had sought his guidance during times of crisis. Widows, single parents, and struggling families were among those he targeted, promising them relief while orchestrating their downfall. One chilling discovery came in the form of a private correspondence between Marcus and an accountant tied to the shell companies he had set up. The letters hinted at a methodical approach to siphoning money, ensuring that each transaction would appear legitimate. Marcus's knowledge of his parishioners' personal lives, gleaned from their confessions, gave him an edge in manipulating them without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, Lisa dug into the cases of other missing parishioners who had disappeared under circumstances similar to Eleanor Wright's. Margaret Hensley's case was particularly troubling, as further investigation linked her disappearance to Marcus's financial schemes. Testimonies from Margaret's friends revealed that she had confronted Marcus about discrepancies in her finances shortly before she went missing. The pattern was undeniable. Those who questioned Marcus often vanished without a trace. Despite the mounting evidence, Marcus maintained his composure. He continued leading Mass, delivering passionate sermons, and comforting his congregation as if nothing had changed. He leveraged his position to discredit Lisa subtly, suggesting to his followers that her work was an attack on the church itself. Many in the community rallied behind him, unwilling to believe that the man they trusted so deeply could be capable of such betrayal. However, Marcus's confidence began to waver as the police investigation closed in. Detectives found inconsistencies in his alibis and financial records, leading them to suspect that he had orchestrated the disappearances of both Eleanor and Margaret. The abandoned cars, the missing belongings, and the eerie similarities in the victim's last known interactions with Marcus painted a damning picture. As pressure mounted, Marcus took desperate measures to cover his tracks. He destroyed documents, erased digital evidence, and even attempted to transfer remaining funds to a new set of offshore accounts. His paranoia grew, yet he refused to back down, convinced that his charisma and status would shield him from the consequences of his actions. But the walls were closing in. Lisa's relentless pursuit of the truth and the authorities' growing body of evidence were dismantling the carefully crafted image Marcus had maintained for years. The priest, who had once stood as a beacon of trust and guidance, now faced exposure as a predator who had betrayed the very people he claimed to protect. The turning point came when investigators uncovered a critical piece of evidence linking Father Marcus Delaney directly to the disappearances of Eleanor Wright and Margaret Hensley. In a hidden storage unit rented under a false name, police found personal belongings belonging to both women, including Eleanor's missing purse and Margaret's family heirlooms. The discovery was undeniable proof that Marcus had been involved in their disappearances. The media quickly seized on the story, and the once respected priest became the center of a nationwide scandal. For Lisa Harrington, it was the culmination of months of relentless investigation. As the evidence piled up, she worked tirelessly to ensure the public knew the full extent of Marcus's crimes. She published a damning exposé detailing his financial manipulation, the use of offshore accounts, and the pattern of disappearances among his parishioners. Her work painted a picture of a man who had weaponized trust, exploiting the confessional to prey on those most in need of help. The story spread like wildfire, and the public's perception of Marcus shifted from a holy man to a cold, calculating predator. Law enforcement swiftly moved to arrest Marcus, but he didn't go quietly. As officers arrived at the rectory to take him into custody, they found him gone. Marcus had fled, leaving behind a meticulously cleaned office and a letter addressed to his congregation. The letter was a mix of denial and self-pity, accusing the authorities and media of conspiring against him. He claimed he was being persecuted for his faith and that the charges were fabrications. Despite his attempts to deflect blame, the letter only fueled public outrage. The manhunt for Marcus began immediately. His extensive knowledge of the community and years of manipulation made him a skilled fugitive. Authorities tracked his movements through a series of safe houses and anonymous accounts, but he always seemed to stay one step ahead. However, his arrogance proved to be his downfall. Desperate for resources, Marcus attempted to withdraw funds from one of his offshore accounts, inadvertently alerting investigators to his location. The chase ended in a remote cabin outside the state. Marcus, disheveled and visibly aged from weeks on the run, was taken into custody without resistance. The image of the once revered priest in handcuffs was splashed across every news outlet, a stark contrast to the man who had stood before his congregation as a symbol of righteousness. During his trial, Marcus maintained his innocence, claiming he had been framed. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Testimonies from victims' families, financial records, and the contents of the storage unit painted a damning portrait of his guilt. The trial revealed the extent of his schemes, from exploiting parishioners financially to orchestrating disappearances when his victims became liabilities. The courtroom was packed with former parishioners, journalists, and those seeking justice for Eleanor and Margaret. Lisa Harrington attended every session, watching as the man who had evaded accountability for so long was finally held to account. When the guilty verdict was read, the room erupted in a mix of relief and anger. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never harm anyone again. In the aftermath, St. Augustine's parish struggled to rebuild. The betrayal left scars on the community, but it also brought them closer together. They honored Eleanor and Margaret by establishing a foundation to support victims of financial abuse. For Lisa, the case was a testament to the power of persistence and truth. Though the journey had been harrowing, exposing Marcus's crimes brought justice to those who had suffered in silence.